The agonized screams never stopped that day aboard the Elysian torture ship. Not until the broken human girl's pain-racked body gave out, and she fell limp against the gore-slicked restraints, passing out as the cruel alien inquisitors activated the neural flare again and again, until only the wet gurgling of ruptured lungs sounded. Jax took a deep swig of whiskey, the burn washing away old memories of similar scenes. Pollux, the fresh-faced Binar private seated across from him in the dim space station bar, leaned in eagerly. "What happened next?" the rookie soldier asked, his three eyes wide. Jax sighed and began the tale he'd told too many times before, but it was one that needed retelling. "Rookie, you got to understand, this was back before the Elysian War, back when us humans were new to the galactic scene. The Elysians, they were the biggest, baddest empire around, conquered 1,000 worlds, enslaved 100 species, ruthless bastards, and their torture tech, neural flares, and agony amps, that shit was the stuff of nightmares." Jax gestured to the hideous burn scars covering half his face. "Trust me, I know. Spent a month in an Elysian dungeon myself. Would have sold out my own mother to make the pain stop." Pollux gulped and nodded, hanging on the old soldier's every word. "So anyway, this girl, Private Lee, she was part of the first group of humans to have a violent run-in with the Elysians. See, the Elysians, in all their conquests, they'd never met anyone like us humans before." Jax clenched a gnarled fist, stubborn, defiant, refusing to break no matter what. That confused the hell out of the Elysians. Their usual torture methods didn't work on us, so when they captured PFC Lee on a botched recon mission, those twisted alien fucks, they went harder on her than usual, trying to make an example of her, show the rest of us humans what happens when you defy the mighty Elysian Empire. The grizzled veteran shook his head grimly. "But torturing that human girl, making her the face of human suffering and Elysian cruelty, that was the biggest damn mistake the Elysians ever made. Lee's pain galvanized us, united humanity against the Elysians like never before. Defiant rage spread through all the space colonies." Jax gestured to a holophoto on the bar wall. It showed a once pretty young woman restraining to a blood-soaked metal slab, her raw muscles and sinews exposed. The woman's hate-filled eyes still glared defiantly at the camera. The Elysians broadcast Lee's torture sessions across the whole damn galaxy, trying to show how they could break humanity's spirit. Didn't work. Her defiance in the face of all that agony, it just inspired billions of humans to sign up for the war. To Space Marine like me and you. So listen up, rookie. If the Elysians had never tortured that human girl, if we humans didn't get our asses in gear and tech up for war, the Elysians would have kept expanding. They would have conquered Earth, enslaved humanity, and wiped out all other species. None of us would have been sitting in this bar right now. We'd all be dead or slaved." The old soldier signaled the bartender for another round. "But thanks to Lee and what she endured, the Elysians got a lot more war than they bargained for. A hell of a lot more. They learned the hard way. Don't fuck with humans." Jax cracked a grim smile. "And that, rookie, is the real story of how the Elysian Empire fell, all because those dumb alien bastards chose the wrong human girl to fuck with." Jax leaned back in his seat, his mechanical hand whirring as he gestured expressively. So as the war against the Elysians ramped up, Command sent Christian Henderson's squad to Zephyr. Nasty place, Zephyr. All toxic jungles and acid rain. But it was a key strategic target, because the Elysians had their main comms hub there. The mission was to sneak in, blow that comms array to hell, and get out quick. The grizzled veteran took another pull from his whiskey bottle. Christian and his buddies, they fought like demons. Gunned down the Elysian guards, placed the charges, the whole shebang. Lit up that comms hub like a damn fireworks show. But... Jax's voice grew somber. The Elysians, they had a real hard-on for Christian after that. See, they recognized him from the vids of Lee's torture sessions. He'd been in the background, watching, unable to do a damn thing to help his fellow soldier as the Elysians flayed her alive. Pollux listened intently, his youthful face a mix of awe and horror. So when the Elysians realized Christian was the one who'd fragged their comms hub, they were out for blood. Sent in a capture team to take him alive during the extraction. Christian's squad, they fought like hell to protect him. But the Elysians, they had the numbers and the firepower. Jax's eyes grew distant, seeing memories rather than the dimly lit bar. Half the squad got blown to bloody chunks right there in the jungle. Christian, he took some fire but kept fighting. Last man standing. But the Elysians, they had these neural nets, you see. Shot him up with one. Locked up his muscles, knocked him out cold. The old soldier drained his glass dry. They dragged Christian off to one of their black sites, an interrogation camp, and that's where they started in on him. Jax's voice lowered to a growl. Those sadistic Elysian fucks, they pulled out all the stops. Neural flares, agony amps cranked up to the max. Injected him with pain enhancers till his blood was more chemical than hemoglobin. Kept him awake for days. Subjected to physical and psychic horrors I can't even name. The veteran's mechanical fingers clenched, servos whining. They wanted intel on our troop movements, fleet positions, all that strategic shit, but more than that, they wanted to break him, to shatter Christian's will like they'd tried and failed to do with Lee. Jax met Pollux's eyes intently. But Christian, he was a tough bastard, tougher than the Elysians could have ever imagined. See, he'd made a promise to himself, after seeing what they did to Lee. Swore he'd die before he ever gave those alien fucks the satisfaction of hearing him scream. The scarred soldier smiled grimly. And so no matter what they did to him, no matter how much agony they pumped into his nerve endings, Christian just glared at him. Glared with that same rage and defiance that Lee had shown. Jax slammed his empty glass down onto the bar. Christian held out for weeks down in that dungeon. The Elysians, they grew more and more frustrated, started getting sloppy with their torture tech, pushing the neural flares beyond safe limits. The veteran gestured to his own burn scars. Damn near killed him a few times, but Christian, he just laughed in their faces, spat blood and taunted them, told them that humanity would never break, never bow to Elysian tyranny. Jax leaned forward intently. And then one day the door to Christian's cell exploded inward. He thought it was the Elysians coming to torture him again, but it wasn't. It was... Jax paused, pouring himself another finger of whiskey. The amber liquid sloshed into the glass, catching the dim light of the bar. He took a slow sip, savoring the burn, before continuing his story. Zorax, that sadistic Elysian fuck, he was getting real pissed off at Christian's resilience. See, Zorax had tortured dozens of species before, and he'd always broken them. Always. But Christian, he was different. No matter what they did to him, he just wouldn't crack. Jax's mechanical hand clenched into a fist, servos whining. So Zorax, he started getting creative, started using these experimental drugs, shit that had never been tested on humans before. Cocktails of chemicals that fucked with your mind, made you see things, feel things that weren't real. The veteran's voice grew quieter, heavy with the weight of memory. He pumped Christian full of that shit, dosed him up till he was tripping balls, till he couldn't tell what was real and what was just the drugs fucking with his head. And then, while he was all doped up and vulnerable, Zorax wheeled in this machine. Jax tapped his temple, his eyes hard. Some kind of advanced Elysian mind probe tech. Nasty stuff. They hooked Christian up to it, jacked wires right into his skull, tried to rip the intel right out of his brain. The old soldier shook his head slowly, but even then, even with his mind all scrambled by the drugs and that machine clawing through his grey matter, Christian didn't break. He fought it, tooth and nail, used every scrap of willpower he had to keep his secrets locked up tight. Jax let out a low, impressed whistle. That kind of mental fortitude, that sheer force of will, I ain't never seen anything like it. And the Elysians sure as hell hadn't either. They'd never gone up against an enemy like us humans before. The veteran leaned forward, his voice low and intense. See, the Elysians, they thought they were hot shit, thought their tech and their smarts made them better than us. But they were wrong, dead wrong. They'd underestimated us, underestimated the strength of the human spirit. Jax grinned. A fierce, proud thing. And Christian, he proved it to him. Proved that humans would never break, never bow no matter what. And word of what he'd endured, of how he'd resisted their best efforts to crack him, it spread like wildfire through the Elysian ranks. The old soldier sat back, sipping his whiskey. Those alien bastards, they started getting real uneasy. Started wondering if maybe they'd bitten off more than they could chew with this whole war against humanity thing. Christian's defiance, it sowed the first seeds of doubt in their minds. Jax took another swig of whiskey, the burn familiar as he continued the tale. Now this is where shit gets interesting. See, there was this young Elysian officer, Tyrion. Kid was different from the rest of those sadistic fucks. The old soldier leaned forward, his eyes intense. Tyrion, he'd seen some shit, done some shit. But watching what they did to Christian day after day, it got to him. Started to question everything he'd been taught about the glory of the Elysian Empire. Jax chuckled darkly. Guess even Elysians have their breaking points. And Christian, with his unbreakable will, he was Tyrion's. The kid started to realize that maybe, just maybe, humans weren't the savage, inferior species he'd been led to believe. The veteran's mechanical hand clinked against his glass as he gestured. So Tyrion, he started helping Christian, sneaking him extra rations, painkillers, anything to make the torture a little more bearable, slipping him intel too, layout of the facility, guard rotations, security codes. Jax's voice grew quieter, almost reverent, and Christian, even after all he'd been through, he didn't hesitate to trust Tyrion, to see the good in him, despite the uniform he wore. That's the thing about humans. We've got a capacity for forgiveness, for seeing the best in folks that most species can't even fathom. The scarred soldier sat back, a hint of pride in his eyes. So with Tyrion's help, Christian hatched a plan. A batshit crazy, desperate plan, but a plan nonetheless. And when the moment was right, he made his move. Jax slammed his empty glass down on the bar, the sound echoing through the dimly lit space. Christian, he waited till they took him out of his cell for another round of interrogation. Then, quick as a flash, he struck, overpowered his guards using some of those fancy Elysian fighting moves Tyrion had taught him. The veteran's voice grew louder, more excited. He got his hands on a plasma rifle and started fighting his way out, one corridor at a time. Tyrion, he did what he could to help from the inside, caused distractions, unlocked doors, guided Christian through the facility's maze. Jax's eyes were distant, seeing the scene unfold in his mind's eye. It was chaos, pure and simple, alarms blaring, Elysian soldiers pouring in from every direction, but Christian, he was a man possessed, fought like a demon, cutting down anyone who stood in his way. Jax leaned forward, his scarred face grim. Zorax and Christian, they faced off right there in the heart of the facility. A battle of wills as much as weapons. Christian was battered, barely standing, but he refused to go down easy, refused to give Zorax the satisfaction. The veteran's mechanical fist clenched. They traded blows, plasma bolts scorching the walls around them. Christian took a hit to the shoulder, then another to the leg, but he kept fighting, kept pushing forward. He knew this was his one shot at freedom, and he wasn't about to waste it. Jax's voice grew ragged with emotion, and then Tyrion, that crazy brave bastard, he made his move, came charging out of nowhere and tackled Zorax, knocked him off balance, gave Christian an opening, just for a split second. The old soldier mimed raising a rifle, his eyes hard. Christian didn't hesitate. He lined up his shot and squeezed the trigger, drilled Zorax right between his beady Elysian eyes, blew his sadistic brains out the back of his skull. Jax sat back, exhaling heavily. After that, it was a mad dash to the extraction point. Christian and Tyrion, they fought side by side, cutting a path through the remaining Elysian forces, stole a shuttle and blasted their way out of that hellhole, leaving nothing but fire and corpses in their wake. The veteran drained the last of his whiskey, slamming the glass back down. And that, rookie, is the story of how Christian Henderson escaped from Elysian captivity, how he struck a blow against those alien fucks that they'd never forget. Jax fixed Pollux with a piercing stare. But it wasn't just about Christian, you understand? His escape, his alliance with Tyrion, it sent shockwaves through the whole damn war, made folks on both sides start to question everything they thought they knew about the enemy. The old soldier leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Because if a human and an Elysian could find common ground, could work together despite all the hate and propaganda, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something better, for an end to all the bloodshed and suffering. Jack sat back, a fierce gleam in his eye. Christian and Tyrion, they planted the seed, showed that even in the darkest of times, even in the midst of a brutal war, compassion and understanding could still take root, could still change hearts and minds. The veteran gestured to the bustling bar around them, to the humans and aliens of all stripes drinking and laughing together. And that, rookie, is why we're all here today. Why the galaxy looks the way it does now, all mingled and messy, but mostly peaceful. Jax raised his empty glass in a silent toast. Because a long time ago, on a dark and distant planet, two soldiers from opposite sides of a war decided to see each other as something more than enemies. Decided to take a chance on trust, on hope, on the idea that maybe we're not so different after all. The old soldier's eyes shone with a fierce, proud light. Christian and Tyrion, they changed the course of history that day, showed us all that even in our darkest moments, even when hate seems to drown out all else, there's still a chance for something better, for understanding, for peace, for a galaxy where we stand together instead of tearing each other apart. Jax leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Now listen up, rookie, 'cause this is where shit gets real. He took a swig of whiskey, the ice clinking against the glass. Christian and Tyrion, they stole an Elysian scout ship. Small, fast, hard to detect, perfect for slipping past enemy lines. The grizzled veteran's eyes narrowed, but Zorax, that sadistic fuck, he wasn't about to let his prize prisoner escape, not after all the time and effort he'd put into trying to break him. Jax's mechanical hand clenched into a fist. He launched a full-scale manhunt. Every Elysian ship in the sector was on high alert, scanning for Christian and Tyrion's stolen vessel. Pollux leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. "What happened next?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jax grinned, a fierce predatory thing. What happened next? All hell broke loose, that's what. He slammed his empty glass down on the bar. Christian and Tyrion, they were flying blind. No maps, no intel, just a general heading towards human space and a whole lot of pissed-off Elysians on their tail. The old soldier's voice grew more animated as he recounted the tale. They had to navigate through an asteroid field, huge, jagged rocks the size of frigates, all tumbling and colliding in a chaotic mess. Jax's eyes gleamed with remembered adrenaline. Christian, he was at the helm, weaving and dodging like a man possessed. Tyrion, he manned the sensors, calling out obstacles and enemy positions. Jax mimed the motion of a ship careening through space. They danced through that asteroid field like a needle threading silk, pulse cannons blasting any rocks that got too close, engines screaming as they pushed the limits of the ship's capabilities. The veteran paused, taking a deep breath. But the Elysians, they were relentless. Zorax had scrambled a squadron of fighters, fast and agile, to hunt Christian and Tyrion down. Jax's voice grew grim. They caught up to them just as they cleared the asteroid field, a dozen ships all armed to the teeth and hungry for blood. Jax nodded, his scarred face etched with the weight of memory. Those odds would have made any sane man surrender, but Christian and Tyrion, they were far past sane at that point. He chuckled darkly. They'd been through too much, seen too much, to just roll over and die. Jax's hands moved animatedly as he described the battle. It was a dogfight like no other. Plasma bolts scorching the void, shields flaring and failing, hulls rupturing in sprays of molten metal. His eyes were distant, seeing the chaos unfold in his mind's eye. Christian and Tyrion, they pushed themselves to the brink, drawing on every scrap of skill and instinct they had, every hard-won lesson from their time on opposite sides of the war. The veteran's voice grew softer, almost reverent, and somewhere in the midst of that desperate struggle something changed between them. The barriers of species and allegiance fell away, replaced by a bond forged in fire and blood. Jax met Pollux's gaze, his eyes intense. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for each other, for the chance to build a future where humans and Elysians could coexist in peace. Jax leaned back, draining the last of his whiskey. And against all odds they made it, battered, bleeding but alive. He shook his head in wonder. They limped into the human outpost on fumes and a prayer. Their stolen ship more scrap than spacecraft, their bodies pushed to the limits of endurance. The old soldier's voice grew quiet, heavy with the weight of memory. But when they stepped off that ramp side by side, it was like a spark had been lit, a flicker of hope in the darkness of war. Jax's mechanical fingers drummed against the bar. The human forces, they were stunned, disbelieving. Here was one of their own, a man they'd thought lost forever, standing shoulder to shoulder with an Elysian defector. Pollux leaned forward, hanging on Jax's every word. "What did they do?" he asked, his voice hushed. Jax grinned, a slow, fierce thing. "They celebrated, rookie. They fucking celebrated." He slammed his fist on the bar, rattling the empty glasses. Christian's return, Tyrion's defection. It was like a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart of the human resistance. Proof that even in the darkest of times, there was still a chance for something better. The veteran's eyes gleamed with fierce pride. That chance, that flicker of hope, it spread like wildfire through the human ranks. Soldiers who'd been on the brink of despair suddenly found themselves standing a little straighter, fighting a little harder. Jax leaned forward, his voice low and intense. And the Elysians, they felt it too. The first cracks in their armor of superiority, the first doubts in their certain victory. The old soldier sat back, a satisfied smile playing across his scarred features. Christian and Tyrion, they started something that day, something bigger than themselves, bigger than any one battle or skirmish. He met Pollux's gaze, his eyes alight with the fire of remembered hope. They showed us that even in the midst of a war that seemed unwinnable, there was still a chance for peace, for understanding, for a future where humans and Elysians could stand side by side as equals. Jax raised his empty glass in a silent toast. Jax's mechanical hand whirred softly as he leaned back, his eyes distant. "The thing about hope," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "is that it's infectious. It spreads faster than any virus, any propaganda. And once it takes hold, it's damn near impossible to stamp out." The old soldier took a slow sip of his whiskey, savouring the burn. That's what happened with Tyrion's defection. When the Elysians saw one of their own turn his back on the Empire, it got them thinking, got them questioning everything they'd been told about the glory of conquest, the superiority of their species. Jax's gaze sharpened, focusing on Pollux. It started small, just whispers in the ranks, a few soldiers here and there, wondering if maybe the humans weren't the savage, inferior race they'd been led to believe. But those whispers, they grew, spread like cracks in the foundation of Elysian society. The veteran's voice took on a note of grim satisfaction. Christian and Tyrion, they saw that unrest, and they knew they had to act, had to strike while the iron was hot. He chuckled darkly. They volunteered for a mission so balls-out crazy, Command thought they'd lost their minds. A deep cover-up, infiltrating the heart of Elysian space to make contact with the dissident factions. Jax shook his head, marveling at the audacity of it. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple, but Christian and Tyrion, they didn't hesitate, loaded up on weapons and intel, said their goodbyes and slipped across enemy lines like ghosts in the night. The old soldier's voice grew hushed, intense. What followed was a series of covert ops so tense, so risky, it would have made any sane man's hair turn white. Christian and Tyrion, they moved through Elysian space like shadows, always one step ahead of the authorities, made contact with rebel cells, smuggled weapons and equipment, coordinated sabotage and strikes against key Imperial targets. Jax's mechanical fist clenched, servos whining. They were a two-man wrecking crew, leaving chaos and confusion in their wake. Elysian Command, they couldn't figure out how their own people kept turning against them, how their installations and supply lines kept going up in flames. It was like trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. The veteran leaned forward, his eyes blazing. And with every mission, every strike, the rebellion grew. Elysian soldiers and civilians alike, flocking to the cause, realizing that maybe, just maybe, there was another way, a path that didn't lead to endless conquest and subjugation. Jax sat back, draining the last of his whiskey. Christian and Tyrion, they were the spark, the catalyst that set the Elysian Empire ablaze with the fires of dissent. And as those fires spread, as more and more Elysians turned against their masters, well, that's when the tide of the war truly began to turn. The old soldier set his empty glass down with a decisive clink. Of course, the Elysian High Command, they weren't about to take this lying down. They hit back hard, cracking down on any hint of rebel activity with brutal efficiency. But Christian and Tyrion, they were always one step ahead, dodging raids, slipping through blockades like ghosts in the machine. Jax's voice grew tight, strained. There were close calls, too many to count, moments where it seemed like their luck had finally run out. But somehow, through skill and grit and sheer bloody-minded determination, they always managed to slip the net, to keep the flame of rebellion burning even in the darkest of times. The veteran's gaze grew distant, haunted by memories. I remember this one time they were holed up in a safe house on some backwater Elysian colony, had a whole squad of Imperial commandos closing in, real elite bastards. Christian and Tyrion, they knew they were trapped, knew their odds of survival were slim to none, but did they surrender? Did they give up the cause? The old soldier leaned forward, his voice low and intense. That was the thing about those two. No matter how hard the Elysians hit them, no matter how desperate the situation, they just kept coming, kept fighting, like they'd stared into the abyss of despair and come out the other side with a fire in their bellies that couldn't be quenched. Jax's mechanical fingers drummed against the bar, a staccato beat. And as their legend grew, as word of their exploits spread through the rebel ranks, something started to happen. The Elysian dissenters, they began to believe, began to see Christian and Tyrion as more than just men, as symbols of the resistance, avatars of the cause. The veteran's voice took on a reverent, almost awed tone. They became the rallying cry of the rebellion, the proof that the Elysian Empire, for all its might and technological superiority, was not invincible, that it could be challenged, could be beaten, if only one had the courage to stand and fight. Jax sat back, his eyes gleaming with fierce pride. And stand and fight they did. Christian and Tyrion, they took those disparate rebel factions and forged them into a force to be reckoned with, trained them, equipped them, led them in strikes that crippled Elysian operations across the sector. The old soldier's voice grew louder, more impassioned. They hit supply depots, sabotaged shipyards, even managed to take out a few Elysian warships through sheer guile and tactical brilliance. It was like watching an army of ants bring down a giant, one bite at a time. Jax paused, his brow furrowed in thought. Of course, it wasn't all victories. They had their share of setbacks, of losses. Good people, human and Elysian alike, who laid down their lives for the cause. But Christian and Tyrion, they never let it break them, never let the weight of those sacrifices crush their spirits. The veteran's eyes shone with unshed tears, his voice thick with emotion. They carried the memory of the fallen with them, used it as fuel for the fire in their hearts. And with every mission, every strike, they pushed the Elysian Empire closer to the brink, forced them to confront the reality of their own weakness, their own vulnerability. Jax leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. And that, rookie, is when the real endgame began, when the Elysian High Command, desperate to crush the rebellion and restore order, overextended themselves, left themselves open for a coordinated, decapitating strike that would shake the very foundations of their society. The old soldier grinned, a slow, predatory thing. Christian and Tyrion, they saw that opening, and they seized it with both hands, drew up a plan so audacious, so risky, it bordered on madness. But if it worked, if they could pull it off... Jax trailed off, his eyes distant, lost in the memory of those fateful days. What came next, rookie? Well, let's just say it was the stuff of legends, the kind of battle that changes the course of history, that echoes through the ages like a thunderclap. Pollux leaned forward, his eyes wide and eager. What happened, Jax? What did Christian and Tyrion do? Jax smiled, a slow, enigmatic thing. Patience, rookie, some stories you can't rush. Gotta savor them, let them unfold in their own time. The old soldier signaled for another round, the amber liquid sloshing into his glass. But I'll tell you this much. When the moment came, When everything hung in the balance, Christian and Tyrion, they didn't hesitate. They leapt into the fire with both feet, risked everything for the chance to strike a blow that would shatter the Elysian Empire for good. Jax raised his glass, the light catching on the scars and calluses of his hands. To absent friends, rookie, and to the battles yet to come. Jax leaned forward, his voice low and intense as he described the critical mission. Christian and Tyrion, they knew this was their one shot, their chance to turn the tide of the war for good. The old soldier's eyes gleamed with remembered adrenaline. The Elysian superweapon, it was the stuff of nightmares, a planet killer. If the Empire ever finished construction and brought it online, well, it would have been game over for the human resistance. Jax took a swig of whiskey, savoring the burn. But the rebels, they'd come through with intel on the weapon's Achilles heel, a remote moonbase housing the primary power source. Knock that out, and the superweapon would be nothing more than a trillion-credit paperweight. The veteran's mechanical hand clenched into a fist. Christian and Tyrion, they knew what had to be done. Put together a crack team of human spec ops and Elysian insurgents, the best of the best, all volunteers. They knew the odds of survival were slim, but hell, this was the chance they'd all been waiting for. Jax's voice grew tight, strained with emotion. The assault on the moonbase, it was a thing of brutal beauty. Christian and his team, they hit those Elysian bastards like a bolt from the blue, breached the perimeter with shaped charges, then plunged into the installation like demons out of hell. The old soldier shook his head, marveling at the memory. It was close-quarters combat at its most vicious, Elysian guards pouring out from every corridor, alarms screaming, plasma bolts flying thick as rain. Christian's team, they fought like possessed men, cutting down the opposition with ruthless efficiency, pushing ever deeper into the facility. Jax's voice grew somber, heavy with loss. But the cost, Christ, the cost was high. Good men and women, human and Elysian alike, falling with each bloody meter gained. Christian, he watched his friends, his comrades, cut down one by one. But he pushed on, teeth gritted against the loss, eyes fixed on the objective. The veteran paused, his gaze distant. And then they were at the power chamber. Heavily reinforced blast doors, enough Elysian firepower to hold off a small army. But Christian and Tyrion, they knew this was the endgame, the moment everything hinged on. Jax's voice cracked with emotion. And then Tyrion was moving, a blur of desperate motion, plasma rifle chattering, grenades detonating, buying Christian the precious seconds he needed. The human soldier, he lunged for the power chamber, explosives ready, fingers flying over the detonation sequence, even as the Elysian reinforcements closed in like a tidal wave of destruction. The veteran leaned back, the weight of memory heavy on his shoulders. The charges set, Christian turned to make his escape, but the path was blocked, the Elysian forces too numerous, too close. Over the din of combat, he heard Tyrion's defiant war cry, saw his friend and ally disappear beneath a surge of enemy bodies. Jax closed his eyes, the pain of loss etched across his face. Christian, he knew what he had to do. The mission, the fate of the war, hanging in the balance. So he hit the detonator, even as the Elysian troops swarmed towards him. A flash of blinding light, a roar that shook the very foundations of the moon. The old soldier's voice trailed off, the silence heavy with the weight of sacrifice and triumph. In the dim light of the bar, Pollux leaned forward, his eyes wide with awe and sorrow. The story of Christian and Tyrion's bravery, their selfless dedication to the cause of freedom, hung in the air like a sacred thing. Jax opened his eyes, his gaze haunted yet proud. The power source, it went up like a newborn sun, vaporized the entire installation, along with most of the Elysian forces stationed there. Christian, he was caught on the edge of the blast, survived by sheer chance and a stubborn refusal to die. The veteran's mechanical fingers tapped a staccato rhythm on the bar. But Tyrion, he never made it out, gave his life to buy Christian the time he needed to ensure the mission's success. A hero's end, a sacrifice that would forever change the course of the war. Jax raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. To Tyrion, the Elysian rebel who became a brother. May his name never be forgotten, his courage never fade. The old soldier drained his drink, the burn of the whiskey a familiar comfort. With the destruction of the power source, the Elysian superweapon was neutralized, a devastating blow to the Empire's morale and military might. The news spread like wildfire through the galaxy, igniting hope in the hearts of the oppressed and the downtrodden. Jax's voice grew stronger, infused with the conviction of hard-won victory. Christian, he was rescued by a human extraction team, battered, broken but alive, a living symbol of defiance, of the indomitable human spirit. And as he recovered, as the story of his and Tyrion's sacrifice spread, the Elysian Empire began to crumble from within. The veteran leaned forward, his eyes alight with the fire of remembrance. The rebels, their ranks swelled with each passing day. Elysian soldiers and civilians alike, casting off the shackles of tyranny and joining the fight for freedom. The Empire, once an unassailable monolith, found itself beset on all sides, its foundation crumbling beneath the weight of its own cruelty and arrogance. Jax's voice rang out, clear and strong in the hushed silence of the bar. And Christian, he became the rallying point, the figurehead of the revolution, the human who had stood side by side with an Elysian, who had sacrificed everything for the dream of a better tomorrow. He led the charge, the spearhead of the final assault against the heart of the Elysian Empire itself. The old soldier's mechanical hand clenched into a fist, the servos whining with barely contained power. The battle for the Elysian homeworld, it was the stuff of legends, a clash of titans, a desperate struggle for the very soul of the galaxy. Human and Elysian rebels fighting as one against the last bastion of imperial might. Jax trailed off, his eyes distant, lost in the swirling mists of memory. The bar seemed to hold its breath, the weight of history pressing down like a physical thing. Pollux leaned forward, his heart pounding, eager to hear the rest of the tale. The story of how the Elysian Empire fell, how the galaxy was forever changed by the courage and sacrifice of a few brave souls. The old soldier blinked, shaking himself from his reverie. He met Pollux's gaze, a slow grin spreading across his scarred face. But that, rookie, is a story for another time, another drink. Jax raised his empty glass, the promise of further tales hanging in the air like a tantalizing mist. For now, just remember this. When the chips are down, when all seems lost, it's the strength of the human spirit that sees us through. The courage to stand, to fight, to sacrifice for something greater than ourselves. The veteran's voice was low, intense, filled with the wisdom of a life lived on the razor's edge of history. So when you're out there, rookie, on the front lines of whatever battle comes next, remember their story, remember the price they paid, the victory they won, and know that as long as there are humans like them, like us, there's nothing in this galaxy we can't overcome. With those words, Jax fell silent, the weight of history and memory heavy in the air. Pollux nodded slowly, his heart swelling with pride and purpose. The old soldier's tale, the saga of Christian and Tyrion, would stay with him forever, a guiding light in the darkness of an uncertain future. And in the dim light of the bar, surrounded by the ghosts of fallen heroes and the promise of battles yet to come, the two soldiers raised their glasses in a silent toast. A salute to the past, to the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment, and a pledge to the future, to the endless fight for freedom and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. Jax's voice grew rough with emotion as he recounted the aftermath of the fateful mission. In the dim light of the bar, Pollux could see the ghosts of memory flickering in the old soldier's eyes. When Christian returned from that moonbase, he was a changed man, Jax said quietly. Battered, bloodied, his armor scorched and pitted. But it was the look in his eyes that really got to you. The pain, the grief, the grim satisfaction of knowing that Tyrion's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The veteran took a long pull from his whiskey, savoring the burn. With the Elysian superweapon out of commission, the tide of the war began to turn. The rebel alliance, they pressed their advantage, hitting the Empire hard and fast. Jax's mechanical hand clenched into a fist, servos whining. Christian. He was at the forefront of every battle, leading the charge, rallying the troops. He fought like a man possessed, driven by a fierce need to honor Tyrion's memory, to make sure his friend's death meant something. The old soldier's voice dropped to a growl. He led raid after raid against Elysian supply depots, communication hubs, striking at the very heart of their war machine. Each victory, each liberated world, it was like a tribute to Tyrion, to all the brave souls who'd given their lives for the cause. Jax leaned forward, his eyes intense, and with each blow against the Empire, more and more Elysians flocked to the rebel banner. Soldiers, civilians, even high-ranking officials. They'd seen the cracks in the Empire's facade, the rot at its core, and they were ready to tear it all down. The veteran sat back, a grim smile playing across his scarred features. Christian, he became a symbol of the rebellion, a living legend, the human who'd stood side by side with an Elysian, who'd sacrificed everything for the dream of a free galaxy. His name, it became a rallying cry, a beacon of hope in the darkness of war. Jax drained his glass, the ice clinking softly. The Elysian Empire, they tried to stamp out the rebellion, threw everything they had at us, but it was too little, too late. The spark had been lit, the fire of revolution fanned to a blaze. The old soldier's voice rang with quiet conviction. Planet by planet, system by system, we pushed them back, shattered their hold on the galaxy, and all the while, Christian was there, leading the charge, the tip of the spear, the heart of the resistance. Jax fell silent, his gaze distant, lost in the swirling mists of memory. For a moment the only sound in the bar was the soft clink of glasses, the murmur of voices. Pollux leaned forward, his heart pounding, eager to hear more. The story of Christian's revenge, of the Rebel Alliance's triumphant advance, had him on the edge of his seat. The veteran blinked, shaking himself from his reverie. He met Pollux's gaze, a fierce light burning in his eyes. But the fight, rookie, the fight was far from over. The Elysian Empire, they were on the ropes, but they weren't done yet, not by a long shot. Jack signaled for another round, the amber liquid splashing into his glass. They'd been backed into a corner, and you know what they say about a wounded animal. It's when they're most dangerous, most desperate. The old soldier leaned forward, his voice low and intense. The Empire, they rallied their forces for one last stand, drew their armies back to the heart of their territory, fortifying their core worlds. They were going to make us bleed for every inch, every scrap of ground. Jax's mechanical fingers drummed a staccato beat on the scarred wood of the bar. Christian, he knew this was it, the endgame, the final push that would decide the fate of the galaxy, and he was ready to meet it head-on, to lead the charge one last time. The veteran's voice grew hushed, heavy with the weight of memory. The battle for the Elysian homeworld, it was like nothing I've ever seen, a clash of titans, a desperate struggle for the very soul of the galaxy. Christian and the rebel forces, they threw everything they had at the Empire's defenses, every ship, every soldier, every scrap of courage and determination. Jax took a deep pull from his glass, the burn of the whiskey a familiar companion as he delved into the climactic moments of the war. The rebel fleet, a ragtag assemblage of human and Elysian ships, dropped out of hyperspace above the Elysian homeworld. Before them the Imperial defenses loomed, a formidable array of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and fighter squadrons. "It was a sight to behold, rookie," Jax said, his voice rough with emotion. "The might of the Elysian Empire, arrayed against us in all its terrible glory. But we had something they didn't. We had hope, and we had each other." The old soldier's eyes grew distant as he recalled the opening salvos of the battle. Rebel ships, outgunned and outmatched, hurled themselves against the Elysian line with reckless abandon. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the void, ships erupting in silent fireballs as the two fleets clashed. "Christian, he was right in the thick of it," Jax continued, his mechanical hand clenching into a fist. "Leading a strike team aboard a captured Elysian frigate, the Dauntless. Their mission was to punch through the defenses and land on the surface, to take the fight to the heart of the Empire itself." Pollux leaned forward, his eyes wide with awe as Jax recounted the daring assault. The Dauntless, engines flaring, sliced through the Elysian formation like a spear. Elysian fighters swarmed around it, peppering its shields with laser fire, but Christian and his crew held their course. "They fought like demons, every last one of them," Jax said, his voice filled with pride. gunners manning the point defense turrets, pilots weaving through the enemy fire, and Christian, he was everywhere at once, rallying his troops, coordinating with the fleet, a born leader forged in the crucible of war. As the Dauntless breached the atmosphere, Elysian surface-to-air batteries opened up, filling the sky with flak and missiles. The frigate, its hull scorched and pitted, hurtled towards the Imperial Palace, a towering edifice of gleaming metal and pulsing energy shields. "They hit the palace like a hammer blow," Jack said, slamming his fist on the bar for emphasis. Breaching pods punching through the shields, disgorging Christian and his strike team into the heart of the enemy stronghold. They fought their way through the corridors, a running battle against the Elysian honor guard. The old soldier paused, his eyes haunted by the memories of that desperate struggle. The crack of rifles, the sizzle of plasma bolts, the cries of the wounded and the dying. Christian, his armor battered and scorched, pressing forward with grim determination, his eyes fixed on his ultimate goal. "And then there he was," Jack said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The Elysian Emperor, the being responsible for so much suffering, so much death, sitting on his throne, surrounded by his most loyal soldiers." But Christian, he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his weapon leveled, and he spoke. In the dim light of the bar, Jax could almost see it. Christian, his face a mask of righteous fury, his words ringing out across the throne room. "Your reign ends here, Emperor. Surrender, and face the judgment of those you have wronged." The Emperor, his face a mask of arrogance and disdain, rose from his throne, his hand reaching for his own weapon. For a moment it seemed as if the confrontation would end in blood, in one final, brutal clash. But then the Emperor hesitated. His eyes, once filled with the certainty of victory, now held a glimmer of doubt, for he could see the truth, written in the faces of Christian and his soldiers. The Elysian Empire, for all its might and technological prowess, was crumbling. Its subject races rising up, its own people turning against the tyranny they had once embraced. Christian, his own heart heavy with the weight of all that had been lost, all that had been sacrificed, stepped forward. He took the Emperor's weapon, and with it, the fate of the galaxy itself. And as he did so, he could feel the eyes of his fallen comrades upon him. Tyrion, Lee, all those who had given their lives for the dream of a free and just universe. "For it was over, rookie," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "The war that had consumed us, that had shaped the course of history itself. With the Emperor's surrender, the Elysian Empire began to crumble, its hold on the galaxy slipping away like sand through an hourglass." The old soldier raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "But the price we paid, the blood we shed, it was a heavy toll." Christian, he knew that better than anyone. For even as the celebrations began, even as the galaxy rejoiced in its newfound freedom, he could feel the weight of all those lost pressing down upon him. Jax drained his glass, his eyes distant, lost in the swirling mists of memory. And that, rookie, is the story of how the Elysian War ended, with a surrender, a sacrifice, and a hope for a better tomorrow. But the scars it left, the wounds it inflicted, those would linger long after the last shot was fired. Jax paused, the weight of his tale heavy on his weathered features. He took a long pull from his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the bar. Pollux leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and sorrow. "The celebrations, they were something else," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "Whole planets, entire systems, lighting up with joy and relief. The war that had consumed us for so long, it was finally over. We were free." The old soldier shook his head, a rueful smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But for Christian, for the man who had sacrificed so much, who had endured the unimaginable, the victory was bittersweet. The scars on his body, they would heal with time. But the scars on his soul, the weight of all he had lost, and that was a harder thing to mend. Jax's gaze grew distant, lost in the swirling mists of memory. He tried to find peace, to rebuild like the rest of us. But everywhere he looked, he saw the ghosts of those who hadn't made it. Tyrion, Lee, all the brave souls who had given their lives so that others might live free. The veteran's mechanical fingers tapped a staccato rhythm on the scarred wood of the bar. So he left, packed a bag and hopped the first transport to the outer rim. Said he needed time, needed to find a way to come to terms with all that had happened. Pollux nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Where did he go?" he asked softly. The old soldier leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But as he wandered, he started to see things, started to notice the way the galaxy was changing, the way the Elysian Empire was crumbling in the wake of their defeat. The veteran sat back, a grim satisfaction etched into the lines of his face. Some of them they tried to hold on to the old ways, warlords and would-be tyrants, carving out their own little fiefdoms in the chaos. But others were starting to question, starting to wonder if there might be another path. Pollux's brow furrowed, trying to picture it. The hero of the human resistance, the man who had suffered so much at Elysian hands, working side by side with his former enemies. It seemed an impossible thing. But Jax just smiled, a small, secretive thing. Christian, he had a way about him, a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. And so, planet by planet, community by community, he helped the Elysians rebuild, helped them find a new way forward, a way based on cooperation and trust rather than fear and domination. The veteran's expression darkened, a shadow falling across his features. But not all of them were ready to let go of the past. Some, like Zorax, Christian's old torturer, they clung to their hate like a drowning man clings to driftwood. They saw Christian's efforts as a betrayal, a weakness, and they vowed to make him pay for it. Jax's voice grew hushed, heavy with the weight of old pain. Zorax, he tracked Christian to a remote little colony world, a place where he had been helping the locals set up a new government, a new way of life. And there, in the quiet of a dusty village square, he confronted his former prisoner one last time. The old soldier closed his eyes, the memory playing out behind his eyelids. It would have been easy for Christian to strike him down, to repay all the suffering Zorax had inflicted on him, all the cruelty and pain. But in that moment, with his old tormentor at his mercy, Christian saw something, saw the fear and the anger and the brokenness that drove Zorax, that had always driven him. Jax's voice was barely a whisper now, raw with emotion, and so instead of vengeance, Christian chose forgiveness. He lowered his weapon, looked Zorax in the eye, and told him that the cycle of hate ended here, that there was still a chance for him, for all of them, to be something more than what they had been. The veteran fell silent, the weight of his tail hanging in the air like smoke. For a long moment, the only sound was the clink of glasses, the low murmur of conversation from the other patrons. Then Jax looked up, his gaze meeting Pollux's with an intensity that stole the breath from the younger man's lungs. That day, in that dusty little square, Christian showed us all what true strength looks like, showed us that the greatest victory isn't the one that comes from the barrel of a gun, but the one that comes from the human heart. The old soldier raised his glass, the amber liquid glowing in the dim light. "To Christian Henderson," he said, his voice ringing with quiet conviction, "the man who endured the unimaginable, and in doing so, changed the course of the galaxy forever." As the toast echoed through the bar, Pollux felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked at Jax, at the scars and the cybernetics that told the story of a lifetime of war, and he saw in the veteran's eyes a glimmer of something he had never seen before. The hope that even in the darkest of times, even against the most impossible of odds, the human spirit could still triumph, could still find a way to heal, to forgive, to build something better from the ashes of the past. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.